That's a couple of seconds early. All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's a regular scheduled council meeting of October 23rd. We start this meeting, we just want to acknowledge that we are having this discussion, and we work, live, play, learn on the traditional territories of the Coast and Straits Salish people, specifically the Lekwungen people, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. So the connections to these lands and the adjoining waters continue to this day. First item, approval of the agenda. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Moved, seconded, thank you. Any discussion? Councillor Patterson?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I don't approve the agenda as presented. I would like to move that we refer item 6.1, the 2023 questionnaire report, to a future council meeting. The report contains, in my opinion, commentary that could trigger negative emotional response from First Nations. On reflection, I think it could be amended to be more sensitive and inclusive and reflecting First Nations philosophy of doing things in a good way. I think the report has so much useful information, but I am concerned about the emotional response that a certain portion of the report could trigger in First Nations. So I would like to have it referred to a future meeting.
So I haven't had a motion like this on approval of the agenda before. So I'm just getting some guidance from our Mr. Coates, the Director of Corporate Services. I'm going to take the motion as a motion to amend the agenda to strike 6.1 from the agenda. Is that appropriate, or should we move? I'm thinking the motion is to refer that item to a future meeting.
Your Worship, excuse me. Yes. So I think, sort of by design and default, that would amend the agenda by referring this item to a future meeting of council.
So from a motion perspective, we have a motion to amend the agenda. Is that an appropriate motion? Is that
I would say that the agenda be amended to refer, so to remove that item and refer it to a future meeting of council.
Okay, thank you. Is that that's a motion? Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Green seconds. So we're dealing with the motion to amend at this point, not the main motion. You think you've already motivated there, Councillor Patterson. Is there any other discussion on this matter? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. The motion doesn't speak to any specific changes to be made to the language, so maybe if we could get elaboration on exactly what language staff would want to address before the item comes back before council.
Councillor Patterson.
I think if we refer to page 11 of the report, which would indicate a do not support for council's priority about the goal that council had already stated about advancing truth and reconciliation with Indigenous people based on respect and a desire for shared prosperity. I think the way that the language in the commentary on that page is phrased, it could trigger a negative emotional response with First Nations, and I think it could be amended to reflect more the desire of council, and also that our goals for truth and reconciliation are in fact quite separate from other matters that are also referred to on that page.
Any other discussion on the motion to amend the agenda? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate Councillor Patterson's comments. I share those feelings, and it's the Appendix 1 summary and page 11 that was troublesome for me as well, independently, looking at the chart and the fact that it was clustered with the DARE program together. I just feel that there is a more sensitive way to set, and there was no context really. You would have to read through all of the open-ended questions to understand the context. And I think on first blush, this could trigger an emotional reaction from Indigenous readers if they looked at this. And so it's a matter of sensitivity and being sensitive to the impacts potentially on them. And that was, so I understood this in the same way. And I did speak with our CEO today, which I really appreciated, to get some clarity. So, but I will be supporting the motion to amend and defer. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to speak just, with their hands, I'm going to speak in opposition to the motion. I think it's a motion to receive information. It's 900 and change people responding to a survey. I thought the comments, which is the primary informational piece, are quite they do sort of highlight the point that that economic reconciliation is not, well, important, is not, a core part of our responsibilities as a municipality. And those, I think I'd like the chance to kind of talk to some of those points in the agenda today. I also realize that this is an item on the agenda today to receive, and it's there to help inform our priority setting in November, and I think it's important for us to have this information available to us. So I'm not supportive of the motion to amend. I appreciate the spirit with which it's given, but I'm not going to support the amendment. Is there any other discussion on the amendment to amend the agenda? So a vote in favor of this would remove that from this agenda. A motion in opposition would keep it on the agenda. We'll deal with it when we get to that as part of the agenda package. All those in favor of the amendment? And any opposed? I have Councillor Watson, Appleton, Murdoch, Braithwaite, and Smart opposed. That motion fails, so we'll be dealing with that item on the agenda today. Any other amendments or changes to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Opposed, carries. We have adoption of the minutes from, we have 3 of them on the agenda. We can deal with all 3 simultaneously. Move adoption, moved and seconded. Councillor Braithwaite, I know you flagged one misspelling. That was dealt with already on the, okay. Appreciate those being dealt with offline as opposed to wordsmithing on the fly. Just a spelling error. Seeing any other corrections or amendments? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Yes, if I could just ask a question to staff.
Please.
Mr. Coates, we had an exchange about a change, and I haven't actually gone back to see if the amendment's made since that
that's good.
email. I just want to make sure it's in there.
Your worship, through you, so all of the changes that were provided to staff ahead of time have been incorporated into the minutes that are in the agenda package tonight.
Thank you very much. All right, any other discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, those carry. Moving on to item number 4, Mayor's remarks. I'm just going to flag if anybody is online and wishing to join in the public participation period. I'd appreciate, this is a good time to raise your hand in the Zoom meeting, or if you're calling into the 1855 number, to use that tool now and hit star 9 to raise your hand through the 1855 number. Or if in the audience, you can just come forward if anybody's here to talk. This is for items not on the agenda tonight. It's coming up next. So just a few things just to update. It's been a busy bit of time since the meeting last week, and I thought I'd just update. So I had the opportunity to attend the Gustavson School of Business Distinguished Entrepreneur of the Year Award. It was very interesting and heartwarming. It was Virtual Gurus was the company, and Bobby Reset, who's the first Indigenous woman to receive multiple levels of financing in Canada, and has built a fairly robust business, really making an effort to employ people who are otherwise marginalized and providing really valuable services to people all across the world now in a virtual setting. So that was quite interesting. Many members of council were joined me, but on Wednesday was the Heritage Foundation Marion Cumming talk, Heritage Talk with Helen Edwards, who is the Heritage Detective. It was well attended, and those are always such great heritage things. If anybody's interested in going to an interesting talk, there's Wednesdays every month or two through the winter. The Canadian College of Performing Arts also had their season opener, The Way to Vance, which is the first presentation of the English translation of playwright David Paquette's work, and was very well done. That is a fantastic little organization. If people who don't know it and are watching online, if you have a chance, it's one of the premier performing arts schools in Canada, and they put on a lot of these little shows locally here that are worth going out for. I also want to just thank staff, both leadership and HR, for the inaugural Long Service Awards for Oak Bay. Remarkably, over 40% of our permanent workforce has been with us more than 10 years. The people in that room had over almost 1,800 years of experience working with Oak Bay, so it was And some of the stories that came out of that, I wish I had time to share, but they were quite fantastic in terms of the benefit that has with the insight into the community, but also really speaks to the work environment we're trying to create here, which is to keep and to attract and keep good employees. We also had the very first International Tennis Federation tournament in Oak Bay. It's history this last week. So it was a junior tournament. There's going to be a Masters tournament coming in November. And it's just sort of under the radar, going on in the bubbles here in Oak Bay. But they had youth participants from China, Iran, Australia, India, Ukraine, from all over the world coming here to participate in the sanctioned event. So pretty neat to see. Also just want to congratulate Royal McPherson Theatre Society. Councillor Braithwaite's the representative on that board, but they put on the first time they've ever put on any of the Wagner's Ring Cycle, which is a massive thing in a little tiny theatre, so it was quite a production. So I want to compliment them on that, a very successful presentation of that. Also, anybody who's interested in attending the Oak Bay Police Board meetings, the next meeting's tomorrow, but all the meetings once a month are being held in this room now to make it a little bit more accessible for people, both physically, but also sometimes people are intimidated going into a police building, so we're holding all of the police board meetings in the chambers going forward. Heads up on the CRD, so the provisional budget is coming on Wednesday, and right now the provisional budget is sitting around 3.5% net for all the different services combined. And last but not least, we have a number of committees and commissions that are renewed annually with applications, so if anybody's interested in serving on one of our many committees and commissions, and potentially a new one, since we're considering an accessibility committee later, please get your applications in now, as those are closing off, I think, in the next week or two. That concludes my remarks. There's quite a lot of stuff in there, but if there's, so I think, Councillor Green, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted to ask you, on the Accessibility Committee, should that be approved, is that application period now or later on, pending approval?
Why don't we take that question at that?
Okay,
Agenda
thanks.
item.
It's just because you referenced it, so I
Yeah.
wasn't sure. Thanks.
I think it may take a bit of time to set it up to take the pieces, but it's a good question. If we can align it, that would be nice. All right, so item number 5 on the agenda is public participation, comment and question period. This is a chance, as I noted, if anybody's interested in speaking to us, this is the chance to raise your hand. Anything that's not on the agenda tonight, not land use related, this is the chance to come forward and just talk to council about anything of your interest. We don't have a huge gallery today, so I'm not sure if anybody here is interested in there's nobody online that I can see. So I'm looking to their staff. I don't see anything that they're flagging is on there either, so we will come back to this table then and move on to item number 6. If anybody's late to the table and raises your hand online, I will do my best to come back to you, but I will move forward with section 6. The next 2 items do not have public input attached. They're reports to be received. The first is one that we already had a brief discussion on, which is the annual questionnaire results. This is really just, this is for information. It is not subject to public input. I might actually just see if someone would just put the motion on the table, then we can take questions and comments simultaneously.
Move receipt.
Move receipt. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Thank you. I will hand this, is Ms. Bay, I'm handing this over to you to provide a brief introduction.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report provides results of the 2023 annual questionnaire, which ran from May 23rd to July 4th. This questionnaire was for the first time this year launched during the property tax season to really try and boost the number of responses that we get. And that was in fact what we found, is that when we were able to send out notices associated with the property taxes, we got a significant bump in the number of responses. So I think we were validated in taking that bit of an experiment, because traditionally we've run them in the fall, and it's been a bit of a busy season for people with the September back to school rush. So as people got their property tax notices and reflected on the services that the district provided, the annual questionnaire provided an opportunity for residents to provide feedback on council's priorities and related projects. So slightly different theme this year on the questionnaire than in the past years, where we focused on services, and that's really because this was the first year of council's mandate. So we took the opportunity to give residents the opportunity to comment on both council's selected priority projects as well as the projects that were on the long list. And we also provided quite a few opportunities actually for open-ended responses. We had 4 open-ended questions that people could respond to, and you'll see from the length of your package of well over 100 pages, they're actually closer to 200 pages of responses, that it was an exhaustive response, and people certainly took the opportunity to share what was on their mind. And a lot of people responded. We got 922 questionnaires returned by the deadline, number both much higher than what we received back in past years, as well as much higher than has been experienced in other municipalities that were running surveys at the same time. The results of the annual questionnaire are summarized in the 3 attachments to staff's report. And the report is provided here for you today for receipt, so you can read it and consider the public feedback over the coming weeks in preparation for your upcoming review of council priority projects scheduled at this point for the end of November. It also gives the public an opportunity to look at the comments that came in from other residents, as the public may want to participate in that session in late November. So that's a bit of a plug for that. And that, Your Worship, concludes my introductory comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bay. I do I'll preamble this slightly with the fact that I do recognize that I think when people are facing a 9% tax increase, it probably colors their consideration of some of these questions a little bit in terms of what the priorities are. Easier to say things in the abstract and harder when there's actual hard money attached to them. This is just for receipt, so I'm happy to take comments. I think the comment Councillor Patterson that you made earlier, I think, bears some commentary, and I do note that there's significant support for working with First Nations and less for the economic development side of that equation in the responses. I do want to point out that there's a lot of really good nuanced commentary in there, sort of recognizing the importance of that, but questioning the appropriateness of that within the levels of government. And I do really want to thank all the people who filled this in and actually wrote the written submissions. There was an enormous number. And while there's not a sign, we're not using this as this percentage is higher, so we're going to make that a priority. That's not the point of this. The comments I thought were all very, very thoughtful and useful, and will help sort of inform as we're going into November in our update on the strategic planning and our priority setting pieces. So, are there any questions or comments? I'll take either. We have a motion on the floor. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Ms. Bay. Again, what a fantastic result to get so many responses, and I think that speaks to, on so many levels to how the survey was written, how long it was, and how much consideration went into that. I wanted to ask, just thinking ahead to potentially repeating the success next year, has there been any thought towards how we could reach renters and under 34, particularly with either mail-outs to rental buildings or contacting UVic or Camosun to make sure that we're grasping information from the underrepresented sector in this survey?
Ms. Bay.
Thank you, Your Worship. It was an extensive reach out through this, and certainly as we were seeing the returns come in, we were monitoring for the different age groups and doing what we could to boost responses from the underrepresented age groups. Those are the age groups that are very, very busy, not to mention, everybody's busy these days, but it is, we have found in the past that it is harder to get that younger demographic. We did boost ads for the younger demographics where you can start to target ads. So we do that with this type of questionnaire, and we do make an effort to go out and specifically solicit more responses from the underrepresented groups. Having said that, there's only so much we can do, and I think you can see in the summary reports that we are underrepresented in some of the younger demographics and overrepresented in some of the older demographics. Having said that, that would be more of consequence if we were trying to pretend that this was a statistically significant survey, and that we could get in and analyze specifically what do 18 to 25-year-olds think compared to 65-plus-year-olds. That would require a much more rigorous approach, and most importantly, it would require randomness, which this survey doesn't incorporate. This is very much whoever wants to respond to the survey can respond to the survey, and that is why we position it as a questionnaire as opposed to a survey.
Please continue.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate hearing all the efforts that were made in that regard, and I agree. There's only so much you can do if you've made all of those efforts. I guess I just wanted to ask an additional question with regards to that, through you, Mayor, to Ms. Bay. Is it possible this time or next time in that underrepresented field to get a summary of a glimpse of what our future generation, that 18 to 34-year-old bracket, is thinking, now that we've been able to sort of establish in the survey that we're not getting that voice? I'm wondering, is there any way of seeing that information as a council member, either in raw data or in a synopsis?
Ms. Bay?
Thank you very much. If anyone's ever interested in a breakdown in particular age groups, those are numbers that we can run with some effort. So hopefully, if there's requests, they're measured in terms of one could run limitless scenarios of these types of situations. So happy to run a special scenario if there's a desire for a scenario for a specific target group. It is a bit of work because we do need to go through, especially if there's a desire for the open-ended questions to be parsed out that way. It's certainly technically possible, but every time we do that, we have to go through and read through all those responses to make sure that there's no private information embedded in the open-ended comments, and that's where the labor-intensive part comes in, because we have to make sure that anything that goes out doesn't disclose private information or doesn't have inappropriate comments and so forth embedded in it. But if it's the pure numbers, that's relatively easy to do. I would just always attach the caution to it that the further you get into the subsets of the analysis, the less reliable it is in terms of being reflective of the population as a whole. If memory serves me right, that 18 to 34-year-old category, in terms of the number of responses we got versus how many of that age group is present in the population, we heard from about 1% of 18 to 34-year-olds versus if you take the entire population of 18 plus and how many responses we got, we heard closer to 7%. So it's just, I always put cautions on it by the time you get into that level of finite analysis. But happy to run them if that's what council wants.
Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Well, thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Ms. Bay, I really appreciate you elaborating on that. I'm just very aware of how much the decisions we're making around the table every day are, potentially affecting that younger generation in the long term, and just really want to make sure that we have made every effort to capture those voices. And I do just want to thank you again for making all the efforts you have that you've now addressed. Thank you.
Are there other, go ahead, Councillor Watson, and then Green.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Ms. Bay. Just following up on a sort of an aspect of that, really exciting to see that even though it was over 900 individuals responded, I think it's a great response rate, and I do take your point that there is nothing random about that. That was self-selection. But I did wonder about the vast repository now of comments, which were given to us as just sorted by the question, and how to actually make sense of that, or whether there are any tools or anything available to help mine that a bit, maybe if you tried it in future, to make it more accessible. I know that there was a huge amount of work to do even just to strip that and present it to us there, but I was thinking about all the daily tools are emerging to help with these kinds of things, and wondering if there are ways that, even though I hear that it's not statistical, even still, it does contain lots of information. And if you have any thoughts about that for the next time around, or thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Ms. Bay, I think I'm picturing things like Wordle, kind of, or not Wordle, but the word things, yeah. I think should help highlight yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And yes, I was playing around with some of that in a struggle or an attempt to try and make some more sense of it. As it was, we had to go through manually even to group the comments within each of the sections. And as you can imagine, that took considerable effort. And is, of course, whenever humans are involved, subject to human error as you go through and do that and scan for all the things that have to be removed. So we did, it was fairly labor intensive. The reason it was so labor intensive was in part because of the way our survey software is set up. It's very limited, so we couldn't ask open-ended questions in response to each individual question the way that the survey software is limited, which meant we had to go back after the fact and group them, which isn't ideal. The survey software we currently use does not provide for text analysis either. It was sufficiently frustrating and limiting this time around, and also even the way that we set up the questions. You'll notice that if you delve through all the individual comments, there were a fair number of people commenting on their frustration with the survey. We shared that frustration ourselves, so we have actually started looking into alternative software. And council may be seeing a budget request come through for 2024 that would allow us a more sophisticated use of this and less of our staff time going into the text analysis and hopefully delivering better product for the public and for council to digest in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Councillor Green next.
Through you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Bay. It was really interesting reading. I found the comments fascinating. And I think one of the key messages was action, action, action. And having that kind of response was huge as well. One question, will you be conducting these surveys in future during the tax season? That seems to be advantageous in terms of response rates. And the other question followed on Councillor Smart's comments about renters. And so I asked someone if they'd participated, and they said, no, I'm just a renter. And I wanted them to remove the word just, and I wanted to say to them, and I did say, you are not less than, you have an equal voice, and we value that voice. So if there's a way to reach renters, that would be terrific as well. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Bay.
Thank you, Your Worship. And yes, we're very cognizant of the fact that we got a boost from the property tax notices, but there's only a segment of the population that receives the property tax notices. So we very much also put an effort out on trying to get other segments of the population. I feel quite good actually about the breadth of engagement efforts that we undertook. It was a very broad, really targeting the rec centers as well. Some of those places where the younger people tend to hang out, and we reached out through the schools as well to try and get the young parents and not all of whom are property owners, and same with the rec center users, and we were out at the night market, which includes renters and owners, and so there's just a really broad-based effort, and I would certainly welcome any suggestions for additional outreach that we could do, but I feel like personally, I feel like we tackle, I don't feel like we left a whole lot of stones unturned with the resources that we had available. Thank you.
Thanks. Motion to receive is on the floor. Is there any other discussion or comments or questions? Don't see any. I'm happy to call. I'll just really appreciate the questions. I think those are the effort to get people out is super important, and I also appreciate staff recognition that it would be nice to have some ways of reporting, pulling that data out in ways that are sort of more dynamic and can be sort of and I also appreciate the warnings that be careful if you're parsing 7 people's opinions, then it becomes less and less statistically meaningful. But I certainly know that this is going to have at least it provides a lot of context for our discussions in November, and which is the important part of this. And again, I want to just express my appreciation to all the people who did take the time and effort to fill in the survey. It was a lot of reading, but very interesting at the same time. So the motion's to receive is on the floor. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Councillor Patterson opposed. We have 6.2, third quarter budget report. Mr. Payne, I believe you are on deck.
Thank you, Your Worship. Annually, the district prepares a quarter 2 and a quarter 3 budget report, and those reports contain full financial forecast for the year. This gives us the opportunity to amend the financial plan if need be, or consult council if attention is required or decisions need to be made prior to the year elapsing. At this juncture, the district is forecasting that revenues will likely exceed what was budgeted, and operating expenses will be about 5.3% or $2.6 million less than the maximum authorized. And I just make a note there that the financial plan sets the maximum authorized that a municipality may spend, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what staff expect will be spent. For instance, the budget contains some contingencies in there and also provides for full staffing, although vacancies occur throughout the year, which can produce a operating budget surplus. So that being said, we're forecasting a $1.5 million operating budget surplus. That budgetary surplus could be allocated by council as council should wish in the future. Full financial results will come to council in May with the audited financial statements, and it's at that time we'll know what the actual operating budget surplus is, if there is one. Of note is the Parks, Rec and Culture operating forecast, which are better than budget by about $250,000. That's net of additional revenues less additional expenses. And that will mean that the district will be able to use $250,000 less of the COVID-19 restart grant that it is currently utilizing to fund and support operations there. But that will mean that there may be one more year of that grant left, but not likely beyond 2024 to support operations. Of note, there is a Parks, Rec and Culture economic analysis underway at the moment, so that'll provide some information to council moving forward. Capital expenditures are forecasted to be $15.2 million, which would set a record for the 5th consecutive year. Maximum authorized capital expenditures was $34.6 million, but again, much of that the district didn't expect to spend in 2023, such as $8 million in Uplands sewer separation project. Certainly that project has started, but never expected to get it done within this year. So it's sort of a placeholder budget, as well as there's some placeholder budgets in there, like $1.3 million for marina structural repairs. For the first time, we've prepared capital output forecasts. So the engineering department worked very hard to prepare core infrastructure output. So we're not just forecasting dollar values spent on infrastructure, but also the length of pipe and the square meters of pavement that we anticipate will be replaced by the end of the year. And we've set some annual sustainability targets. So if we take, for instance, the total kilometers of storm pipe in the district and divide by its useful life, that sets sort of an annual amount that we should be replacing if we were doing it evenly. And in the district's SIR plan, the Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan, we also identified a backlog of infrastructure that's overdue for replacement. So we aim to replace that backlog over about 25 years. So we've also set some temporary output targets as well, and that can be found in attachment 2 for council's edification. We do see a growing increase in our capital output capacity, but recruitment remains a challenge in the engineering department. So that's that. In June of 2023, council approved a tender in the amount of approximately $3 million for the Dalhousie Storm Sanitary Sewer Project. Council will note that we never identified a specific project budget for that project. It was funded by a combination of capital programs. So we used our road reconstruction program, our storm main replacement, and our sanitary sanitary sewer main replacement capital programs, and it was within those envelopes. So there's no specific budget reporting line item that council will see in the capital forecast. However, internally, we established an estimate of $3.5 million for that entire project. That include the tender and construction, engineering consulting, as well as construction management. And we're forecasting by completion of the project, for the project to be $3.6 million. So within the internally established project budget by close to about 2.9%. The forecasted substantial completion of that project is March of 2024, so that was within the expectations that the engineering department set at the beginning of the project. With that, I will conclude my presentation. I'm available for any questions that council may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think I'd do the same process we did last time, just a motion to receive.
Move receipt.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Then we can just take comments and questions simultaneously here. I think, go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Director Payne. I wondered if you could just elaborate a little bit more on page 10 of your report, that attachment 2 on the capital output forecasts. I just want to make sure I understood correctly when I'm looking at the third column, percentage of infrastructure system versus like the output target. It looks to me like we're very much below our targets, and I think that's what I heard from you. And I guess I would love some background on, I think what you said was, could you just clarify, was it entirely a staffing issue, and are we doing about the same as last year and previous years, or are we, yeah, just a little bit more, if you could elaborate on that chart would be great.
Mr. Payne.
Thank you, through your worship. Yes, I'll refer to column 4 that we refer to as meant to be a sustainable annual output target. And that's essentially the amount of kilometers, for instance, that you would want to replace on an annual basis, because that's how often you would expect your infrastructure to be depreciating. And that would be about 1.2% of the entire system you would want to be replacing on an annual basis. This year, we're forecasting 0.74%. So short of the annual amount. We also, in addition to that, want to replace another 2% of the system, which is the next column over, and that's the backlog of infrastructure that's overdue. So a total target of 3.3. That's a temporary target of over the next 25 years. So yes, we're quite short of where we want those targets to be. You know, we always expect it to be scaling up on that. How does it compare to last year's? It is quite a bit more than last year, but there's a fair distance between where we want to be and where we are now. And yes, I would say that the challenge in scaling up to those targets is primarily, if not completely, to do with staffing. You know, we do have, I believe, we had 2 vacancies up to about 2 weeks ago, and now with the acting director in place, it's about 3 vacancies. And the acting director, in fact, is the programmer for the core infrastructure. So, that's just an example, and we're really starting to catalyze the programming of the various projects. You know, it's with the hope that we can present to council and the public all the projects within those core programs as well. So neighborhoods and constituents and council can know what the specific projects are, why they're prioritized, et cetera. But vacancies continue to be a challenge.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to Director Payne. I guess I'll start kind of backwards on my questions, but just to stay on that subject, which you've gone through, I'd like to come to it a different way, though, because I did bring a resolution forward about capital projects 2021, I guess, and so I just want to follow up then to see also that I am understanding this in the way you put it. I understand certainly how you've come at this approach, and yes, I agree, we have improved performance on output, but we're still below what we need to satisfy the sustainable infrastructure replacement plan. And of more concern to me as a member of council to manage the infrastructure risk as a core part of capital planning, which is supposed to be council's role. So when I look at this now and I see 25 years versus the last report which we had received from the former director of engineering. The goal was to, based on that report, achieve enough work within 15 years to mitigate most of the risk to the community. And so what I'm wondering now in what is presented, have we missed the 15-year target that we were trying for, and we are now pushing this to 25 years, or is the mitigation of risk not connected in any way to the financial presentation?
Mr. Payne.
Through your worship, Councillor Patterson is correct. The SIR plan outlines the intention to increase capital output and address that backlog over a time frame of between 15 and 25 years. Now, there's no reason why I chose 25 years for this presentation, other than just to highlight that we are now establishing those output measures. Certainly, we can express that over 15 years as well, and that would be a good idea as well. And inevitably, the message would result in the same, that there's still quite a gap between what we're producing right now and what our intention is to produce.
Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Going back to the bit of the beginning of your report, you do talk about investment returns are forecast to be up significantly from budget. What I'm wondering is if you've done the analysis on how much of that is attributed to rising interest rate returns versus higher than budgeted reserve fund balances that have resulted from underspending on budgeted capital projects.
Mr. Payne.
Through your worship, I haven't done the analysis, but at the top of my head, we're spending most of our core infrastructure replacement funding this year, that being sewer, storm, water, and pavement. And so those is a source of most of our reserve usage. So in other words, it's not because we have a higher investment balance at the end of the year forecasted that we are achieving. It's really around yields, and yields have risen at a historical pace since the budget was prepared last year. So it's primarily due to that.
Go ahead, please.
And just one last question, if I might. If you could enlighten us to the status of federal and provincial grant applications for the Uplands sewer separation project?
Mr. Payne.
Through your worship, I don't believe that the results of that has been announced just of yet.
Thank you. Great. Any other questions of Mr. Payne on this, or comments are welcome as well? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship. I will make a comment. I would just like to say that, in my time on council, there's just been progressively more and more detail and more positive news that comes out of these reports. I just want to commend Mr. Payne and his team and all of the supporting staff whose work goes into preparing these statements. The level of reporting and the level of visibility that the community can access about the financial operations of the district are currently exceptional, and just really, I as a councillor, I can very easily speak to the public about where their tax dollars are going with this deliverable. So again, my congratulations to the whole staff team for preparing these documents, and it has become almost routine to have us be in a very solid financial position and have Mr. Payne explaining all of the details behind it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Don't see other hands popping up. I'll speak very briefly, which is just that, probably just really to echo what Councillor Appleton said. It's great to have this information, and I appreciate that. Sometimes you look at these and think, oh, we're only at a third of what we should be at, or a quarter of what we should be at in the big scheme of things to do the catch-up. At the same time, you look at where we were just a few years ago doing $2 or $3 million a year and working now at $15 million a year and making that changeover. Really impressed. I had a chance to talk to some of the engineering team on Friday last week, and just hearing from them their excitement about scaling this up. It's a massive shift as an organization, and it's exciting to see it, and I think it's really appreciated that we have the reporting that we have, just to be able to not overpromise, because we still have a long way to go, but it's good to see that said positively. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, I would agree through you. Mr. Payne, it's been great having your involvement in the budgeting process over the years, and these last two councils in particular have really benefited from your structuring the budget and your input, and the public also have benefited from that expertise. I think they have a much better view and understanding of where the priorities are, and certainly infrastructure, we know that, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I don't see any other hands or comments, so I'll call the question. All those in favor, this motion to receive. Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. You're welcome to stick around for the rest of the evening if you wish, but you're not required to. We are moving into Section 7. Section 7, 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3 all are available for public input. 7.1 is improving winter walking in Uplands Park. Procedurally here, what we're going to do is get a quick overview from Mr. Meikle, our Director of Parks, Recreation and Culture. We'll have an opportunity for council to ask questions, and I'll go to the public to see if there's any public input, and then we'll get to the come back to this table for motions. So with that, Mr. Meikle, over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to council. So this dates back to last spring, and one of the project backgrounders was presented to council, really established that we staff take a look at establishing some temporary pedestrian interventions that do not impact natural or archaeological values in the park in the short term. We spent the summer basically looking and taking a look at different options and different ways to deal with drainage, etc. Council at that point had approved a $100,000 budget to address winter walking concerns. I think, as we're all aware, there's certain areas of walking in Uplands Park where there's high levels of water retention and mud, and as people walk through those areas in the winter, they tend to expand the designated trails by trying to avoid the mud and the water, and end up impacting the surrounding plant life and soil health of those trail areas. So worked closely with Wylie Thomas, our contracted restoration biologist, who's done a great deal of work in Uplands and Anderson Hill and other parks in the area. We also worked with representatives from several companies which manufacture and install park infrastructure such as boardwalks, etc., and really tried to figure out the best way that we could provide. Staff took a look at providing that full loop of a walking path in Uplands Park, just so we were providing that full opportunities for the recreational side or the physical activity and exercise side of walking in the park while protecting those natural areas. Come back to council with three options. The first one is based on the previously approved budget of $100,000. That one would install one section of boardwalk, and I'll just briefly give the boardwalk we're looking at is often termed as a floating boardwalk. It's not dug into the ground. We, again, with that notion of kind of temporary options and options of not impacting particularly the culturally sensitive areas of the park, we didn't want to be installing things into the ground, so they sit on metal platforms, footing if you like, and then the boardwalk sits above that. They are manufactured to outline or be specific to that trail area that we are looking at. So the first piece would be with the $100,000, we would add a section of boardwalk over what we're terming the highest priority section of trail, and I didn't bring a slideshow with us tonight. It's in the report that's attached there, so I didn't feel we needed to spend time going over some of that. Wylie Thomas is available with us though if we do have questions, so could help address some of that. So back to that's option one, would give us a boardwalk over a section that is in sort of the western and northwestern area of the park, what I call the back portion of the park from the water, if that, the water being the front portion generally is how people refer to it, and coming off of Dorset and Lincoln, which is a popular area in the winter to get onto the trails in the park. Option 2 then takes a look at increasing that around that western side of the park or that back side of the park, but looks at extending some of that using what's called screening, which is a finer gravel, if you like. And one of the concerns there, this would certainly address that and would prevent people from widening that trail and walking off of the trail into the muddy areas. But there's a little bit of uncertainty in that piece, just in knowing exactly how the screenings will affect the water distribution or the hydrology in that area. And then option 3 is to complete the full loop with boardwalk in all those appropriate areas as outlined in the report from Wylie Thomas. So those are the 3 options, and we're just seeking council's advice on which option to move forward with to improve winter walking there. We believe all options do provide some improvement to winter walking as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meikle, and welcome Mr. Thomas as well online. If there's any questions appropriate, we'll send them over to you. But again, process here, questions from council, questions or comments from the public, and then we'll come back and look for motions. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks very much, and thanks for bringing these forward, Mr. Meikle. I really appreciate it. I was looking at, I'm favoring option number 3, but the question that I would have because of that would be, where would the additional money, where would you see the additional money come from?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Braithwaite. It's unfortunate Director Payne is left at this time to help with those. Just as outlined, there's still a couple of options there. So we'd be looking at either the Council Priorities Reserve Fund, potentially the Growing Communities Fund, or the Capital Works Reserve Fund. So some options there. We just hadn't fully identified exactly what that means at this point. So.
But just to continue, so that wouldn't be taxable. That wouldn't come out of taxes. That would come out of funds that were already in place.
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. That's my understanding, but I would probably want to get back to you to confirm that.
Thank you. I know that when Minister McKenna was here in 2019, I think, when they declared Uplands a National Historic Site, that she at that time had said that there was quite a bit of money available, and I think that was probably more around the endangered species, but this is protecting the endangered species. So I wonder if there's any ability to, or if there's any grants out there that we might be able to apply for that could possibly help for this, or is there like a half and half grant kind of a thing?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Braithwaite. At this point, we hadn't found anything. We have been searching for grants and trying to find some grants. We get into a bit of that situation where, because we're not necessarily looking at permanent structures within that area, that doesn't actually fit for a couple of grants that are out there. But we will continue to look, and there could be some opportunities there for sure.
Thank you, and thanks again for bringing these forward.
I have Councillor Watson and then Patterson.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Mr. Meikle and maybe possibly Mr. Thomas. I'll let you guys decide. Thank you for the various options laid out and for the graphics, which really help. I have a question. I'll just give them in the order I've written them down to myself. But you have introduced this as any of the options as temporary in nature in terms of improvements. And I just wondered how temporary. If we picked for option 3, for example, and went to the investment of doing these boardwalks, are we really expecting them to come out because there's a different plan in future? Or are we really seeing this as one step to a larger comprehensive plan for managing all the desire lines and informal and formal trails in the park? So that's my first question.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I guess the other question is that, are they seasonal? Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Watson. So it's an interesting one. We, staff would recommend and will be bringing forward with this year's project backgrounders some more information around conducting and developing a comprehensive plan or a comprehensive park management plan for Uplands and Cattle Point. This is from direction from council to take a look at this piece prior to that. So we didn't want to go too far down that road and then have the comprehensive plan results come back and tell us something different. At least we could make those changes should it be. Our hope would be that in the preparation work we've done to this point, that those boardwalks will remain in place and will, as you say, be built upon for future and will be used to actually help start that foundational piece of building upon that trail network for the future. But there's some uncertainty attached to that when you head into a comprehensive park management plan process. So certainly a little bit of perhaps the cart before the horse, but trying to fit those pieces together to meet council's desire to get something happening as soon as possible.
Thank you. I'm just going to, if members of the public are online and wish to comment or add questions, this is a good time to raise your hand, either through the 1-855 number or through the Zoom. And two, Mr. Thomas, you've raised your hand here. I assume you want to just help answer that last question. No, not muted. Mr. Thomas, you're not audible to us at the moment. I'm not sure if there's something going on at that end. There we go.
Is that better?
Yes, much better.
Okay. My understanding is that the boardwalks are designed so that they can be disassembled if necessary, but they are very sturdy and can be left in place pretty much permanently. I would have to check on that. They're modular, and so if we did need to make adjustments, it would be easier to do than if it were built, with posts in the ground. And then in answer to the question of funding, I think there are fundings through the federal government that we might be able to access if we had a plan, and we could show them and say, here's our 5-year plan. We'd like to proceed with, building boardwalks in this section of the park, and they like it. They like projects that are neatly divided that way. So I don't think it would be difficult to find funding.
Thank you. Please continue, Councillor Watson.
Thank you. And back to Mr. Meikle, and maybe also, well, maybe it is to Mr. Thomas. I noticed that in some of the well, at least I think, I tried to follow the trail around myself, not on a wet day, of course, on a beautiful fall afternoon, but I noticed that in some of the areas, at least they appear on the proposal for the circular loop, there are already some gravel screenings, and I wonder if those didn't cost much anyway, but if that is the case, what kind of reduction do they actually make in the budget? Because they appear to already be there.
I'll probably give it to Mr. Thomas.
I could probably answer that. So can you tell me which section you're referring to? Is it along the southern end? If you come out come in the Dorset entrance, turning right, there's an area that we've already paved with gravel, and the idea would be it's actually not gravel, it's river rock that allows for water to flow underneath, but it's apparently not very agreeable to walk on. So the idea there would be to put down screenings on top of it to give it a little bit more stability. So that's that part. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. I had misunderstood what I wondered. It didn't seem that fine. It did seem a bit chunky. All right, so that's that question. And then I just have maybe one more, and it's about wayfinding. If we, there are so many trails through the park, which is obviously part of the problem with the environmental degradation. But I wondered if we make this investment for a circular loop, two things. One, how we actually provide adequate wayfinding for that, and how we maybe encourage people to stay on the circular loop as a primary choice if we go to this kind of investment for whether it's I don't know how soon this happens if we agree to it, but anyway, the sort of combined question there. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Mr. Meikle first, and then go to Mr. Thomas if he wishes. Go ahead, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to council. The plan would be to look at signage once we know what we're looking at in terms of the trailway and what that circular path does. So we will be doing some signage. It's kind of referred to in number 11 in the last page of the report from Wylie Thomas there. Does refer to some signage there, but that would be the plan, is to look at some wayfinding signage and to continue to encourage through signage and through well, our presence in those parks would be to encourage people to stay on those paths. There's some future items coming forward to council that will address some of that as well. So.
The mud is a pretty good incentive on that one. I have Councillor Patterson and then Green.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to Director Meikle. Thanks for the report, and as a person that frequents the park almost daily, I certainly appreciate the comments about routes change seasonally based on how muddy it gets, and it does in fact get very muddy in some areas, and it takes us a while to get our bearings to go on the right paths. But what I am wondering about, because like Councillor Braithwaite, I'm leaning towards option 3, but when I looked at it, the annual labor and materials cost is relatively low compared to the size of the park. And I know that we have been relying heavily on grants and our wonderful volunteers that do so much of the work in the park. And Mr. Thomas, this year I know secured quite a bit of labor through Habitat Acquisition Trust to clear out huge amounts of invasive plants and reduce fire load. But if in doing this, then would you be coming forward in the future with a plan of management of this? And I noticed that there's kind of a growing list of there's some small labor amounts for this park, for invasive weeds, for just many things. I'm wondering how you staff for it now, how we get to have positions that can cover all of the work that's required in the variety of seasons, and perhaps be less reliant on some of our volunteers, many of whom are reminding me constantly that they've been doing this for quite some period of time, and they're aging, and they're wanting us to come up with a plan. So would it be a comprehensive plan that would take into consideration all of these things, and including the Cattle Point Loop?
What's coming next, Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Patterson. So there are two pieces. What we've focused on here is really just maintaining the trail itself and the circular loop of the trail. So it would be, anytime we may need to do repairs to any boardwalk there, or add gravel, or touch up the gravel, those kind of things. That's what is in the report, is really just focused on that trail piece. I think, again, the larger piece would be coming forward, hopefully, if we were to delve into and develop a comprehensive park management plan, some of those other pieces would be addressed. We certainly are highly aware of the amount of time and effort and longevity of the volunteers that have been working in the park, and it's certainly in our plans to start to talk about how we address that should those volunteers move on, so to speak, from working with us. So yes, that is in the works, but some of that would be informed by that process in developing a comprehensive park management plan.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And Mr. Meikle also referred to this as being a culturally sensitive area, and I'm wondering how we incorporate First Nations in this discussion for the overall park management and in fact the walkway system.
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Patterson. Should this be approved, or whichever level this is approved, one of the next steps we would take would be some consultations with local First Nations, just specific to this walking trail and the pathway. There's certainly, in the development of a comprehensive park management plan, would be a much larger engagement plan with local First Nations at that phase.
Thank you very much. We have Councillor Green next.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, to Mr. Meikle, thanks so much for a good report. And I too am leaning in the direction of option 3. Really appreciate all of the options laid out. And my only question, because it's a topic on our agenda later on, boardwalks, how accessible are they for people who are mobility challenged in wheelchairs, walkers, canes, and so on? Are they? Is there a plan to make these accessible for everyone? Thank you.
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Green. My understanding, and Mr. Thomas may have some comments here too, the boardwalks and the plan is actually more or improves the accessibility of the trail system in that park. The boardwalks we have had looked to have designed. We did a consult with Oak Bay Fire Department to ensure that they would be able to travel into all areas of the park should there be fire issue, and the boardwalks would be wide enough to fit their ATV unit they have, which enables them to get into those areas of the park. So we're talking, as wide as an ATV, which I don't have the measurements in front of me, but it should certainly be wide enough to support somebody with a mobility scooter or wheelchair, etc. Yes.
Just a very quick comment through you, Mayor, to Mr. Meikle. One of my favorite places for walking and hiking years ago was the bog at Long Beach. And it was a wonderful boardwalk system. And not that Uplands Park is a bog, I'm not implying that at all. In the winter, maybe. But that's wonderful that accessibility will be increased. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. I'm just making reference to the second page of Mr. Thomas's report, which I appreciate the content that's included in there. The commentary in the report just makes reference to that a comprehensive plan for winter walking in the park overall is obviously a larger undertaking, and this current report doesn't cover all of that ground, obviously, because it can't. But I do note that it specifically references that the plan would need to start with Cattle Point, where overuse is leading to irreversible damage. And I have heard from other folks that do this work, that volunteer in the park and that attend the park regularly and are obviously knowledgeable about these types of things, that the area around Cattle Point specifically is imperiled and has also been prioritized for a boardwalk. So in the larger context of, to put it bluntly, to a larger context of spending on the park to minimize the impact to the natural environment, what should council be considering in that regard? So in fact, would it be more effective or more protective to allocate some of the funds that would be involved in, say, an option 2 or 3 here to some boardwalk or some interventions on Cattle Point in order to safeguard that area?
Mr. Meikle, and you can redirect this to Mr. Thomas if you wish.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will refer to Mr. Thomas after a quick comment. So one of the pieces where staff are a bit concerned about in the Cattle Point area is a bit of the geotechnical advice that we'd be seeking in a comprehensive park management plan, much more rock-based obviously there, and so securing boardwalk into that rock would need to be investigated fully, in our opinion, to make sure it's safe and sustainable and durable over the long term. Staff will be adding to the area that is cordoned off by split rail fence over this next winter and spring to further protect some areas there. But to officially sort of lay out where best to put a boardwalk on Cattle Point, it certainly would require some further work in staff's opinion. And I'll perhaps let Mr. Thomas comment on that as well.
Mr. Thomas, you're still there with us. Welcome back.
Yes, Your Worship, I am, Your Worship. I agree. I mean, I wrote the report, so Cattle Point is definitely, it's been referenced in the management plan for Uplands Park that is the area requiring treatment most urgently. But it's a question of money. All of this costs a lot of money. I think even just doing the design for Cattle Point would be very expensive, and I've seen figures thrown about how much it would cost. So it's not cheap. None of it's cheap. And my wish would be to have a management plan, a plan for developing trails through the park, starting with Cattle Point. And I think a compromise would be to extend, while we're waiting, to extend that exposure with materials already purchased, which is split rail fence. Thank you.
Anything else, Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick follow-up. So I guess what I would ask is, what are the milestones, or I guess the next signposts, the next aspirational goals for the management, sort of access management planning process from staff's view? So we've kind of made reference to an expanded plan. This is specifically understood. This is specifically targeting winter walking as per a response to earlier council direction. But the larger concept of access management keying in with the Uplands Park management plan, what is the proposed sort of timelines and milestones for that process? And will it require further direction from council?
I believe there's another touch point before it goes forward, but Mr. Meikle, sorry, can you just provide an update on that?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Appleton. I'm not 100% sure on the date, so I believe it's late November. Staff will be bringing forward project background related specifically to developing a comprehensive park management plan and seeking the budget allocation to do so for the future and to get started on that in 2024 is the proposal at this point. So that's the next step in the process.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Meikle. I wondered if the scope of this project, when we talk about minimal wayfinding signage, potentially could include, or would it be extra cost to include QR codes on the signs that are put up that would refer people to both why this boardwalk has been put in place, that it's actually for the benefit of native plants, just to avoid community misunderstanding, and also a link to the very special native species. So again, we're further protecting them. And I wondered if that, and I appreciate the quality of signage that's been put up for the Cool Kit, for instance. And I just wonder if something like that could be incorporated in here within the cost, or if that's an extra cost that would require direction from council.
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Smart. Thank you. Excellent idea. And yeah, that certainly would be one of our considerations for signage. Our experience through both the arts and the Cool Kit program, adding that QR code does not necessarily add much in the way of additional cost to already planned signage. So that would happen there. We'd probably need to do a bit of work and some updates to our website that people would be directed to, but again, that's minimal cost as well.
Very much. My very brief question is, I think it's largely been answered. From the sounds of the width, if it takes an ATV, there's enough room there for two people to walk side by side. Is that the intention? Or is it wider than that? Mr. Meikle?
I believe it certainly can walk two people, and two people plus somebody passing them is my understanding.
Okay.
I couldn't find the exact, I want to say just over 4 meters, 4.5 meters stands out in my mind.
Mr. Thomas raised up his hand here, so I'll go to him.
He may have that. Thank you.
I have, it's 1.829 meters wide.
Okay, 6 feet. Okay,
6 feet.
thank you. And then I have a member of the public, at least one, has raised their hand inside of our piece here. So Ms. Matthews, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for allowing me to speak. For a long time, I have been advocating for boardwalks. So I'm in Uplands Park. So I'm really pleased to see that this is under consideration. I do have a couple of questions, and thank you for answering the ATV question, because I noted that in the report. I'm just wondering, my experience with boardwalks, or at least my experience with my back deck and my front deck, is they can get pretty slippery in the when it's raining and when it's wet. And I'm just wondering, I'm assuming that these boardwalk trails that are going into parks must have some ability to prevent people from slipping. I'm wondering if there will be handrails. and people may have to step off, so that would, you may not want handrails everywhere, I guess, but if in fact there's an ATV coming and you need to pass, you just may have to step off. But I'm curious about those kinds of issues. And before you answer them, I also would like to appreciate, I think it might have been Councillor Watson that really kind of preempted a question I had about First Nations consultation, and you've identified that there will be significant consultation for the next management plan. But in terms of this trail planning, you do constantly refer to the term comprehensive or sort of culturally sensitive areas, or culturally important areas. And I'm just wondering, for the current trail determination that you're working on, has there been that consultation with the Songhees? And how have you determined, given that current boardwalk plan or the options, how did you determine which areas might be considered culturally sensitive? I mean, apart from the obvious that it's not going through the Camas Meadow. So that's around just the slipping and board handrails, and maybe even putting a bench on that boardwalk if possible. But I'm just wondering about those issues, and then for the current plan, the kind of consultation you have had or will be having with the Songhees for the current. Is that clear? Sorry.
Yeah, well, we'll hand it over here. I think I'm going to give this to Mr. Thomas for the details on the boardwalk itself. Mr. Thomas, perhaps you could just touch on the what's included to prevent them from being too slippery, clarify whether or not there are or not handrails, and then maybe just touch on a little bit on the existing trail and how those came to be, and whether any sort of consultation with First Nations. My understanding is it's been there for a very long time and probably have not, but you may have some additional insight. Go ahead, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have really any additional insights other than to say that, they were chosen along existing trails that have been hammered by, foot traffic for a long time. So they're used currently as a lane for fire trucks. And but there's been no consultation to my knowledge. I'm just looking at the design here. I believe they have hand rails, but I don't have it in front of me. We can check into that. What was the other question? And the width. And slippery. The idea, these are designed not to be slippery. They're designed for winter walking. So
okay,
I think definitely something has to be hammered home.
Okay, because I know in some trail boardwalks they put metal across it to ensure that there's some grip for the feet. So I'm just wondering if that is part of this or needs to be part of this.
Thank you, Ms. Matthew. I'm not going to get into too many of the specific details of that at this point, I think, but I appreciate the question and make sure that we have that covered off when the design comes. Anything else, Ms. Matthews, before I move on to the other speakers?
No, but I think it's an opportunity, even with this this intermediate plan, or this, and however temporary that this might be, is to use this as an opportunity to start conversations with the Songhees or the Shakonian family members of the Songhees. You're already making many initiatives and starting many conversations. So I just hope that you might start that sooner rather than later. So, but thank you very much for taking my questions and for answering them. And I'm really glad you're considering boardwalks. I think I've long thought that would be a good idea. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Matthews. Mr. Meikle, want to add one other piece?
Thank you, Your Worship. I will mention that although there hasn't been formal consultation directly with the First Nations regarding this trail system that's been in place for a long time, we have had both representatives and professors at Camosun College and the University of Victoria do some mapping in the park of some funerary mounds, et cetera, and have identified that those are not on this current trail system. So we do have some awareness of those culturally sensitive pieces. And generally, we refer to this whole park as being culturally and historically sensitive. So it's not just specific to this trail area, but to the whole park. And the last piece I did want to add to, just wanted to be clear that the reference to the ATV was in particular to Oak Bay Fire Department. We're not looking to open these trails to ATV use at all.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. That's been, and any other members of the public wish to speak on this matter? Nobody else online?
Move receipt.
Thank you. So moving receipt of the report. Moved and seconded. Thank you. I'm happy to call the question on that. All those in favor? Any opposed? And look for a motion for either option 1, 2, or 3 at this point.
I would move option 3,
Which is a boardwalk.
which is the
loop.
boardwalk loop.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Seem to be the predominantly supported comment. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I want to thank staff again, and our unbelievable volunteers. I can't thank them enough, along with our staff, for the stewardship that they show for this park. This is like a jewel of Oak Bay, the jewel of our region, actually. And it has been, as I mentioned, declared a National Historic Site. And that's something that I think we need to help protect. And I think that by going with option 3, we can help protect this portion of the park. And to Councillor Appleton's point, yes, there are other portions of the park that need to be protected. That hopefully will come with the master plan. But for now, I think this is a good first step to be able to protect what we can in this park right now. So I will be voting for it.
So just, it was moved and seconded. Would staff prefer that we include in that motion direction to either include like the capital or the Growing Communities Fund or capital works reserves? Is that a preferred piece? So I might just refer the mover.
Yeah.
To this, there's, sorry, I'm just going to go here to the financial impact portion. There's Council Priorities Reserve Fund, the Growing Communities Fund, or the Capital Works Reserve.
So I would add to the motion that we would look at to those 3 items, the Council Priorities Reserve Fund, the Growing Communities Fund, or the Capital Works Reserve, and perhaps also grant applications as well, if possible.
So just hold that for a second. Sorry, you had a point of order here, Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I think Councillor Braithwaite may have mentioned it. I guess we're just talking about, yes, confirming that we're considering these 3 options for inclusion in the 2024 because that's what the report refers to, is essentially that the incremental costs above and beyond $100,000 would be included in the 2024 budget. Is that correct?
Mr. Meikle, turn it to you. I'm just wondering if that impacts the timing if we're looking at trying to get these in for some use during this winter season.
Thank you, Your Worship. My understanding was that it would be coming forward in the 2024 financial planning process. We may not, as it stands, get boardwalk in place for this winter anyhow. It takes about 12 weeks to manufacture and deliver, so we'd be pretty close to that time frame anyhow.
Okay, thank you for that. So this would just essentially leave those options in there for return back. Okay. Yeah, with the addition of potential grants. Okay, thank you. So mover and seconder is amenable to that change. Thank you. So that's the motion then. Okay. Sorry, and anything else you wish to add? Okay. Councillor Green?
Thank you. I just have a quick question or comment through you, Mayor, or to Mr. Wylie or Mr. Meikle, because Councillor Braithwaite referenced the National Historical Site status federally. It may be, and Mr. Wylie mentioned the access to federal grants, so I'm hoping those will be included. I think there really is a strong possibility that we might get some federal money, and also involving First Nations. They may have access to some federal funding that we're not aware of as well. And my last point is I'm hoping we can replace the washrooms at Cattle Point. That would be my, thank you.
That sounds a little off topic, but I'll allow it. Thank you. Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. And just further to Councillor Green's point, and I think staff would do this anyway, but I guess it would be nice Obviously staff will continue to explore the possibility of grants. I too think that there would be a high possibility of grants available for this type of work. I guess it would be implicit in that statement, but I guess I would just put it out there that I guess it would be my expectation that if a grant was identified that required council to definitively assign matching funds or something of that nature, that council needed to indicate its support for a project in order to access that grant, that such information would come back to council. I think staff have always done that in the past, but I figured I would probably just include that for completeness. Thank you, Your Worship.
I appreciate that. And for the record, for those watching at home and can't catch the subtleties, we had a bunch of nodding heads from the staff in the room here, so perfect. Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Perhaps to you, Mayor, I'm just wondering, with regards to, we've heard from staff that they don't necessarily need a motion regarding sharing this information of this project with Songhees Nation, but I'm wondering if it's important for the public to include that as part of either this revision, or perhaps I could move an amendment if that was more appropriate. I'm just wondering if that piece is important to share with the public, should they be seeing this.
It's a fair question. Let me think for a second. Ms. Williams, any thoughts on that? Is it sort of a standard practice now we're doing anything of interest? I'm loath to add it to every motion that we do, but if it makes a point that there's a public benefit sometimes to know that that is actually going to be happening. And Ms. Williams?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Mayor and Council. Currently, we do share information on a project-by-project basis with our reconciliation guide to seek to understand how they would like to be involved in the project, or whether or not they would like to be involved in the project. We are very respectful as well of the number of projects that we have and the number of other local governments that reach out to them. So we're looking at a method whereby once a year we can share out a visual representation of all projects that touch land in Oak Bay, and just seek to ask them once a year if there's anything on there that they would be interested in being involved in or partnering on or being consulted on. And after that, certainly the one-offs would be appropriate to highlight, but at this point it is general practice.
Sufficient. Thank you. Thanks for asking the question. We have a motion on the floor. Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? It's funny when that goes that fast at the end, but there we go. We are on to 7.2, Playground Replacement Policy. I'm just noticing the time we're a little longer than I had sort of thought we'd be at this point, but we'll stay on track. We have Mr. Meikle, back to you for a, that was it? Welcome. Have a good evening. Go ahead, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Council. So this again goes back to some of the previous council direction and council priorities. So development of a playground replacement policy, and staff have taken the approach of looking at some guiding principles, so to speak, for we're now starting that process of replacing playgrounds in the district, minimum of one per year and potentially more, which again will come forward to council in due time. So we also took the opportunity, we had one playground replacement that was already underway, started in terms of our analysis and developing the specifications to go to a request for proposals. That's the Kiwanis-Henderson Playground, which was before council last week, I think. So we used that opportunity to do a bit of public consultation around these guiding principles for replacing playgrounds. So public were invited to vote on 3 options for that playground at Kiwanis-Henderson. And along with that, those 3 options, we had a series of about 8 questions, sort of agree, disagree type questions for the public that really focused in on these guiding principles, and from that have developed this policy to provide staff with, I think, what elements we would be looking for, and when we ask and go to another RFP for the development and manufacture of equipment for those playgrounds, some key pieces we'd be looking for, paying attention to in developing those future replacements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do note this also went through the Parks, Recreation and Culture Advisory Committee before it came here. Councillor Green.
Did you want to go to council, or would you take a motion now, or?
Just take questions at this point, and then I'll, if Then I'll check online if
Okay,
there's anybody from
thank
the
you.
public who wishes to address it. Councillor Smart, then Councillor Watson, and then I'll go to the public, and we'll come back to this table for comments and questions and motions. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Meikle. I really appreciate the inclusion of spaces for youth 13 and up. I think it's really important that we're creating as many spaces in our community as possible for teens, including parks, libraries, and recreation centers at all hours. And so I appreciate this being included. I just wanted more elaboration on the terminology that you have on page 4 of 7, where it says where appropriate and feasible. I don't mind the word feasible, but where appropriate, I guess, and from my perspective, it's always appropriate to have spaces for teens. You know, whether we're giving them seating, little libraries and Wi-Fi or playground equipment. And I just, maybe you can elaborate more on the necessity to say the word appropriate. I appreciate that.
Go ahead, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Smart. The appropriateness really is about the footprints we're dealing with in terms of the playgrounds. There will be some cases where it may be difficult to add additional features without taking away other park space. Those decisions, I would imagine, would come back to council as we're working our way through that process. But there are some of our parks, as you may be aware, that are small in size and already have an existing footprint for a playground. So without expanding that footprint to a great amount, there may be some limiting factors there for us.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you. I would just actually like to follow up on that particular issue, and then I've got a couple more questions through you, Chair, to Mr. Meikle. I also flagged that language and wanted to make sure that if the where appropriate did not become so broad that they were never included, but I also wondered, and I would like you to comment on this, where do the youth themselves want to be hanging out and see and be seen? And do they really, would they ever need to be considered at every location? I know you've already identified at least one factor that would make that not appropriate, and that's just the amount of space or the physical characteristics physically. But of all the 10, is it 10 in total? Some of them may never be places where there would be traction for youth. So if you could just comment on that as a way to filter or focus that kind of decision making?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a very interesting question, and one, unfortunately, we don't have a huge amount of information other than our own experiences of maintaining those parks and those playgrounds areas, and probably what some might term the what's left over after, let's say, a weekend activities from youth and teens. So we do see some of that in some of our playgrounds. So we do have some sense of playground areas or park areas where the teens tend to congregate. So we'd be looking at some of those. We also do know some of the areas where they're also closer to a larger sports field, tends to be areas where youth congregate. So Windsor Playground, which is on the slate for next year, is one that we would certainly be taking a look at. Some other amenities there that might be more suitable to that older age category, to youth. Discussions of, adding to the covered area that's there, some different seating arrangements, some of those kinds of things. So that tends to be where our knowledge at this point, but otherwise it may be that we would have to go out and collect some information on some of that.
Ready, Councillor Watson?
Thank you. And just to follow up, and I wondered if, in terms of that follow-up, if Oak Bay High, Monterey Middle School, St. Mike's are places where you might actually get some direct engagement from that population about their own views. Just if you could.
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that absolutely is certainly some options for us to take a look at. And Windsor, we haven't really delved into what each of the parks we plan to do some consultation with the community on those. So we haven't really delved into what that looks like. But other than those discussions, as I mentioned, that we're aware that that's an area where we probably need to pay attention to some amenities for youth. We also still run youth services ourselves and a teen center in the Neighborhood Learning Center that would provide us some access to speaking to youth. And we did also have a large group of staff that are just outside of the youth themselves, so 16 to 18-year-olds that we'd like to engage as well once we get into that view. The first playground we did, Kiwanis Henderson, is really considered that younger age children's park, and that tends to be the usage we've seen there, so we haven't really delved into that quite yet.
Thank you. If I could continue. A question, particularly given the next item on the agenda. In terms of the principles, I see those. They're clearly laid out. I wondered where neurodivergent kids fit into this overall plan and policy, and if there's any thought of that, if it's assumed in any of these categories, or if it would be affecting planning going forward.
Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Councillor Watson. It's really in item number 2 around accessibility and inclusiveness, and in that first statement there, we do discuss various sensory, physical, intellectual, and or social abilities to play and participate. There are certainly different options in playground equipment that we can take a look at and can consider from there, but that's where we've encompassed that piece.
Thank you. Sorry, I see that now. I think I missed it on the way by, so thanks for flagging that. And then finally, it's a question about your the policy proposals for review of the policy itself. Yes, there's a review clause, and the proposal seems to be to do this actually. Yeah, the policy gets reviewed after 2 years, after the initial implementation, and subsequently on each edition. And I wondered if that was maybe overly ambitious and maybe unnecessary, and if there might be another trigger. And when thinking about a trigger, I wondered in terms of not just review for review's sake, but possibly the use of post-occupancy evaluation, so that you do actually understand what's been happening to the parks themselves, not that would influence any policy change, because you may find out that things are fine and you really don't need to review the policy. So if you could just comment on that, those the frequency of review and other parts of evaluation that might inform that need for review.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Watson. This policy review statement is really reflective of staff's uncertainty, I guess you could say. This is, for all of us on staff, our first time heading into major playground replacement program of this nature. So we just wanted to be sure that we had put some, held ourselves accountable to some places of review along that process. One thing we've certainly encountered with the Kiwanis Henderson playground, as with many other construction projects, it's taking longer than we had anticipated. So we just wanted to make sure we had a couple of different ways of triggering ourselves to take a look at how this is standing up and how we've implemented it, whether it makes sense, whether we've missed anything as we move along, without getting too far down that replacement road, so to speak. Certainly, I am open to advice and suggestions on that. But yes, and we have talked a bit about an evaluation process. I will note there also will be a proposal to head into a Parks, Recreation and Culture Master Plan process in the coming years that would also incorporate some of that evaluation of where things are at in that process. So that was in the back of our minds as we did this.
Councillor Watson.
Yeah, I think that's all for now. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you. I have 2 quick questions. I see there's one hand raised by the public as well. My 2 questions are, there's nothing in the policy, I'm not sure it's needed, but just curious if there's been any consideration for, in addition to the children and the youth, but also for supervisory as a result of activity, some of the things are some exercise equipment, things like that, where adults can occupy themselves while they might be watching over kids there. So that's one question, any consideration of equipment for those keeping an eye on the kids, if there's space available. And the other one was just, I noticed there's some shelter components to the one at Henderson, but there's no mention of any kind of shelter space outside of maybe the equipment itself, but for people, again, who are waiting or gathering spaces for youth or things of that nature. And is there any consideration of shelter as part of a policy? And again, not sure if it's needed as a policy or if it's just something to consider as part of the ongoing design.
Thank you, Your Worship. We're particularly focused on playground equipment itself, and shelters, et cetera, would be considered in part of planning for and managing the park as a whole. So we didn't include it in this particular policy. And sorry, might have to remind me of the first
Curious
question.
if there's any consideration of additional sort of activity equipment for
yes.
those supervising.
Yeah, we did actually put that. That was the one item in the public consultation we did in the public questions of the survey. That was the least responded piece. We did ask about people's desire to have other equipment or other amenities for adults or grandparents, etc., and very low response rate on that one, so we didn't include it.
Great, thank you very much. I'm gonna go to the public first. I'm gonna come back to this table because I sort of said I would do that. Again, we have Ms. Matthews has their hand raised. Welcome back.
Thank you again, Your Worship. As you probably know, I live at Windsor Park, and I'm just wondering, I have not read the policy, I'm sorry, but I'm very aware of the traffic that is around Windsor Park, and I have identified the 30 kilometer speed signs that are simply not observed. And I'm just wondering is when you're starting to work on a playground and playground replacement, if you might also, if you haven't already done so, include in that policy a review of the placement of where the speed limit signs are, because I can tell you for sure that Curry Street is, that speed limit is never, especially in the morning when I'm walking my dog, and people are coming to do garden work or whatever it is. Those pickup trucks are roaring down that street, so they're missing the 30 kilometer zone sign that's at the corner of, I think, maybe Island and Curry. So I feel quite concerned. There's many ways at Windsor Park to enter the park if you're going to head to the playground. And I don't think that the speed limit signs are visible enough, or that there's sufficiently, you may need more to be placed. And I'm wondering if this is a reasonable thing to add to your policy if it's not already there. And I realize that involves an engineering department and a different, or a public utility, I don't know who would do it, but I'm quite concerned about this, and I'd just be interested to know, and I'm sorry if it's already built in, my apologies, but
Thank
I
you,
just
Ms.
want
Matthews.
to understand this, because I don't know where to go when I start being worried about the speed of vehicles.
Thank you, Ms.
Okay.
Matthews. Mr. Meikle, obviously it's not part of doesn't touch on speed limits because they're all 30 kilometers an hour, so I'm not sure what the policy change would be on this. We're really dealing with the policy here, not the technical engineering of each individual site, but perhaps you could just touch on it briefly.
Thank you, Your Worship. We would actually, for this policy, it's, I think what we'd say is it's more about containment to that playground. So we have discussed Windsor just in a prelim fashion, and particularly taking a look at whether we would extend the hedge that's along that side towards the road there, or whether fencing would be necessary. So with a playground policy in particular, we're focused more sort of internally on the playground as opposed to what happens on the outside of that for right or wrong, but that's where we'd be focused with that. So if we were to add something to a playground policy, I would be under that safety category and looking at how we ensure that there's not easy avenues for kids to run out onto a road from a playground.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands from the public, so back to this table. Go ahead, Councillor Smart. And then, sorry, Councillor Green, and then Councillor Smart, my apologies.
Just a quick question following on the mayor's comments around activities for adults who are minding children through the mayor to you, Mr. Meikle. Will you also be looking at seating, adequate seating around, within that internal envelope? You'll be looking at adequate seating. I know that I really appreciate the fact when I take my grandchildren, having a place to sit that's fairly comfortable, not luxurious, but while we while we're watching. So that anyway, it was just about seating for adults. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Green. Certainly, that's one of our first goals, is to at least maintain the current seating that is available at all those playgrounds, and where possible, add to those seatings. I'm certainly happy to take feedback from council in terms of adding some of those components to this policy. That's council's purview. And we've even, there's lots of some options there we've discussed and taken a look at. Chess tables, for example, so those kinds of ideas around playgrounds. But yeah, we certainly wouldn't, the plan is to at least maintain current seating in those playground areas.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor, actually, I haven't gone to Councillor Patterson yet, so I'll go to Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Smart.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Meikle, for this report. I must admit, I don't scrutinize the playgrounds. I know that there are adults actually using some of the children's equipment when I go out, but they don't seem to have done any damage so far, so that's good. One thing I'm wondering about that I don't see in this is how you arrive at the determination of where washrooms will be placed. Certainly Lafayette Park comes to mind, because there was, from what my understanding is, there was a washroom at Lafayette Park, and then maintenance budgets, I guess, didn't stack up for that. But is there a method of determining at what park locations we should consider washroom facilities?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. A little outside of the playground specifically, but might as well have the conversation, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Patterson. It's, a little outside of the scope of this policy, is particular to playgrounds. We do have discussions about washrooms, certainly in parks, and in our planning for and developing or continuing to develop parks as we move forward. There's several factors that would be considered. One we're grappling with certainly at Uplands and Cattle Point is water access, both water to and from a washroom facility, and just what that looks like to add that and cost to that. So there certainly are some of those considerations in the overall planning for those parks. We also tend to gauge overall usage of those parks when considering what those options may be for playgrounds too. So we do try to keep track of usage at some of those parks, but we didn't consider that. This is very focused on the playgrounds themselves.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
And just a quick follow-up to that, in speaking with parents of particularly small children, most of them tell me they make their decisions on what park to go to based on the washrooms, and that will determine whether they walk or drive. So that's why I raise it for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, but perhaps more of a comment than a question. But I'm hearing what my colleagues are saying around the table. I would be in favor potentially of putting forward a motion that asked for an addition to the playground policy that was more of a complete playground policy, knowing that when these come forward to us for budgeting and proposal, we will want to see seating, opportunities for shade and heat events, and I would suggest also bicycle racks to encourage people to not drive. So that I think a small additional paragraph around these sort of more complete playgrounds of the things that would likely need to be approved budget-wise at the same time as a new playground could be a really valuable addition to the policy. But I guess my question would be to Mr. Meikle, do you feel like that would really be appropriate to the way your department works, or would that complicate things?
Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Smart. No, that is perfectly, that would be viable and valid for us to consider in those circumstances. Would all have just influence those estimates for budget, and those would certainly come back to council. So all those other amenities can certainly be considered in playground replacement and redevelopment. Again, there may be some cases where there's some limiting factors in terms of space available at those parks. You're always in that balancing place of giving up green space for a playground amenity or a bench or those kind of things. So you're just trying to juggle some of that to keep that balance present, but certainly could be added.
Thank you. And I agree. I think that's totally reasonable. I think procedurally here, I have one question, and then we'll probably get to a motion. I'll probably suggest we move the recommendation pieces, and then we can take an amendment to that to add additional pieces. But Mr. Meikle, just you touched there again on the budget piece, and I think what actually spurred a lot of this conversation was we had in our budget sort of X dollars per year, or per playground, and there was concern there that we were thinking, okay, well that's sort of the sort of one-for-one replacement costs, and if we're looking at replacing these, that looking at a higher standard at sort of something a bit more fulsome where possible, something that's a bit more of a draw, and this adds, I think, overall, I think it adds all of those pieces that allows for that. But the question of budget, I still have a question in my mind. So if this is approved, then it comes back, then is this something that we in our capital planning process would sort of start tackling the actual dollar amounts allocated in our 5-year financial plan? Mr. Meikle, through me to you.
And vice versa. Thank you, Your Worship. That's correct. We'd be bringing this back. We will be bringing back the plan moving forward for replacing playgrounds in next year's, in 2024's capital plan. There are some adjustments needed as is. And if council recalls, we were also asked to bring back a project backgrounder around expediting that process and what additional funds or resources may be required to do more than one playground in a year. So that will also be coming forward in later November with generally what that looks like is adding installation costs to that. Traditionally in the past here in Oak Bay, our parks crews have installed new playground equipment and playground equipment that is becoming more challenging, partly because of the complexity of the equipment itself, but also just the demands on our small parks crew. So we'll be bringing those adjusted numbers forward with the next round of capital budgeting.
Thank you very much for that. So with that, go ahead, Councillor Watson. Any?
Yes, I have. Sorry, I missed this. I have one final question that came to me while we were going the rounds here. Through the chair to Mr. Meikle, please. I noticed that although the staff report addresses it, the policy itself does not speak to prioritization and timing, and that seemed to me like it might be a gap. I know that in the capital planning process, we will have these parks presented to us in some kind of rollout. But it's possible over the timing of the use of this policy to do at least a first replacement of all the playgrounds, that the decisions around prioritization and timing may need to change. And I just wondered if the policy itself could include some guidance about that so that it as a policy, it really covers all the things that are not just what's in the parks and what they need to address, but how in making our minds up about what comes first and when it gets done is also part of the policy.
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Watson. The current list actually comes from an assessment of the condition of the playground equipment as it is, and prioritizing what is not in the best of shape as compared to other pieces. So that's generally where the priority comes from, as well as what I think is feasible in a year in terms of initially when this was planned, again, was based on our staff teams doing the installation. We're shifting that thinking now, so that could look different, but the actual playground order of playgrounds is still based on a condition assessment.
So just to follow up, and it's kind of in the like vein to Councillor Smart's request or question, if I suggested or suggested that we might amend the policy to include just some language about that, because there certainly seem to be some criteria that are driving that it was just included in the policy itself, that wouldn't cause any.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and get a couple of motions. We just have a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? And maybe we'll just get the motion.
Move the staff recommendation.
So the playground replacement policy be approved as presented. Moved and seconded. Thank you. And then Councillor Smart, I think you wish to add 3 pieces of addition to that. So basically to amend, to further amend the policy to include shade, seating, and there was a third thing I think you had in there,
And a bicycle racks,
and bicycle infrastructure.
as required.
Yeah. So is there a seconder to add those 3? Moved and seconded. Any discussion on those? So this is a motion to amend the motion, so it won't be the final decision, just a motion to whether to include those 3 things in the final policy. Councillor Green?
And I don't disagree. My only caveat, though, is that the focus is on playground equipment and on children and families, and that's the real focus. So I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of what we're doing here, and what we're doing is, because I know that families, caregivers, grandparents, parents, children in particular are, excited about these potential improvements, and it came up, I believe, during the campaign. So I just want to make sure that we don't get lost from the real focus, which is playground equipment itself. Thank you.
You have shade and heat. The heat, I think, was a reference to heat events that we need to have some, so just, I think that can come out of there. Just shade. Yeah, is that correct? Okay, better. Thank you. So that's the motion for amendment, so seeing no other hands on the amendment. Oh, sorry, Mr. Meikle.
Sorry, it may not be my place, but just wanted to ensure that I believe Councillor Smart has said as required, and just in some places where we've already got bicycle racks, for example, those that, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion, sorry, on this? Councillor Green, did you have your hand up on the thing on this? Okay. On the amendment, on this amendment, all those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed, so that is now amended with those 3 things. And Councillor Watson, you indicated you might wish to add an amendment as well.
Yes, I'd like to move an amendment that would ask staff to add to the policy just some brief language around prioritization and timing with respect to their existing budgeting and condition survey elements that have already been identified as driving that prioritization.
So I'm going to suggest some wording. Just to add to the policy language which would inform the prioritization or the criteria for prioritization of playground installations. I think is probably what you're looking for, correct? So the criteria for prioritization, so that the criteria may form part of the policy. Okay.
I'll second that.
So moved and seconded, Councillor Green?
Just a question on clarity. So you don't mean to list those parks so this is not specific, because I just don't want to raise public expectations around specific parks and then everyone goes crazy when it doesn't happen. Okay, thank you. So it's a process then. Thank you.
Okay, let me scroll down again to that, just so we can see that motion. So staff had the policy brief language around the criteria for prioritization. Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? That carries. Any addition? Oh, Councillor Watson.
And I'd like to move a subsequent amendment that staff be directed to reconsider the frequency of the review and to make it less frequent than proposed.
So the wording that staff put up there was staff be directed to reconsider the frequency of the policy review interval to a term longer than 2 years.
Just to clarify, it's 2 years, but then there's an additional tag on, which is after every playground is installed, and that's the part that I'm thinking is possibly too frequent and places an unnecessary burden on staff and the policy. So it's not the initial thing, it's the subsequent reviews. Thank you. We could.
I'm just going to get a motion up here so we can seek a seconder, but I don't want people to second something that isn't clear, so. I think you almost want to just strike the last sentence of this, do you not?
Yeah, yes, I probably do.
Because the first sentence says, should we review 2 years after the initial implementation of the policy, or et cetera. And then the second sentence says, after this initial review, the policy shall be reviewed each time a playground replacement or the addition of a new playground is proposed. So that's something you wish to see stricken? Is that the piece of concern?
I think that what I'd like, I don't want to put a number of years here, but I think after every playground is too often, there will still need to be subsequent review to this policy, because if we write it, it could be here in 10 years, it could be 20 years, and it's going to develop. So it's maybe the motion needs to be a bit less prescriptive, or the amendment, which is just to reconsider the review timing, policy review timing.
I'm just trying to get a motion that's clear on the floor before I seek a seconder.
Ask.
May I ask a question through
Please,
you
go
of
ahead.
Mr. Meikle? Through you, Mr. Meikle, could you just provide clarity to us in the rationale for the 2-year period? I'm just curious. I haven't understood that, so I would like to hear that because there must be rationale that you and staff determined on this one. Thank you.
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Green. Our thinking was after 2 years from this point, our hope will be that we have installed 2 to 3 playgrounds at that point, and would give us a good sense of how we've followed through, how we've implemented the guiding principles of this policy. So that was our assumption at that point. I might suggest actually that, 5 years after that point, we will have hoped to essentially replaced all of our playgrounds, and that may be another point that's a trigger. So maybe the trigger is, after this first round of playground replacements is when we may review it, just as a thought, or 5 years after that first review. We just wanted some point in the middle there to say, once we've done a couple of playgrounds, let's have that touch point, let's evaluate and make sure we're on the right track, and then we'll progress with the remaining playgrounds from there.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Can I just make a suggestion on this one, just to maybe move this along a little bit? The last sentence is, after this initial review, this policy should be reviewed each time a playground replacement or the addition of a new playground. If we just change that, after this initial review, this policy shall be reviewed every 5 years. And then that would just be a very simple way that the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Commission would just look at it. If it's out of sorts, you'd have some experience. It could be changed. If not, it would just sort of go back into the file and be used. Is that a reasonable?
That is very reasonable. Thank you for making it so simple.
Okay. So the motion hasn't been seconded yet. It would just be to change the last sentence. After this initial review, this policy shall be reviewed, and then after that, every 5 years. So that's.
That becomes the last sentence.
Yeah. So shall be reviewed. So it's moved. No, I've done my effort to make it as simple as possible for, is there a seconder for that?
It should say the
Oh.
policy be amended to, after this initial review. Sorry. It should say, after this initial review.
Do you have the original motion up there? Oh, you don't have it, of course, on the, no, it's not the motion, it's the,
It's on page
the document,
6,
yeah.
under the review. So I think,
It just, because we just want to strike out the last part of that sentence and replace it with every 5 years. So I'm going to read it aloud just so we're all very clear. So basically, the last sentence says, after this initial review, this policy shall be reviewed. Strike everything after that, and just says every 5 years.
yeah.
Just need the second sentence of that. Okay, that's your highlighted there. That's exactly right. So everything after that.
Yeah.
Are we all clear on what?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's been moved. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Okay, so it's live. So the amendment here is to just change this review policy to every 5 years as opposed to after every playground. Thank you. Do you wish to speak to it? I think you already have, Councillor Watson, for the most part. Councillor Green?
Just a cautionary note on policy, and having written policy in my lifetime, you want to make sure it's flexible enough to grow and change as programs grow and change. So I'm just cautioning not to tie staff down too tightly on that, maybe up to 5 years or something like that, but you want language that enables rather than disables. That's all.
Councillor Braithwaite?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I'm not sure whether the second sentence actually inhibits them from doing what they need to do. So, yeah, I'm unclear as to, my inclination is to vote against the motion, but I'll wait and hear what other people have to say, I guess.
Councillor Patterson?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I do appreciate the intent by Councillor Watson, but I share the perspectives of Councillor Green and Councillor Braithwaite. I guess the way I read this as it is initially written, it makes sense to me because I believe that with a Parks Committee, Park and Playground Committee, that it's not like we do these things with great frequency. There's years that pass between them, and I would think that every time, as it's written, each time a playground replacement or the addition of a new playground is proposed, you would anticipate that the committee would actually be referring to the policy that is in place as a guidance tool. And at that time, we'll be either using it as a guidance tool and going by it, or if there are changes in the area of playground development that needs to be incorporated, the committee will consider that at the time and would, I would think, be referring it to council, recommending that the policy be adjusted. So I don't want to try to wordsmith everything here at council and mandate it all as a council directive when our intent is to have a committee also actively working on this. So I won't be supporting this. Thank you.
Okay, to the amendment, go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Nicol. I am potentially in favor of this motion, being that after each time a new playground replacement does seem like a lot. And I guess my question through you, Mayor, to Mr. Meikle is, what does review mean? Like, could it mean as little as internally in the engineering department and it's resolved, there's no change and it goes nowhere? Or does it mean that it would definitely have to go to the committee and potentially definitely have to go to council each time? So I guess if we could define what review means, that would be really helpful to me.
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a little unknown. We're just beginning down this road of replacing playgrounds. The first initial review after the 2 years or after 2 playgrounds have been replaced will really be telling, in my opinion, of where we're headed with this and if we're on that right track. Again, I'm happy to do whichever way council provides direction. I think it simply a review of it, as you say, would be an internal staff review after the playground has been installed. Could be a check-in as well with the Parks Rec and Culture Advisory Committee, but it really would start at that staff level of saying, you know, have we accomplished what we set out to do? We may find after the first two, the initial review, that perhaps at that time we'll have a better sense of how often that needs to be reviewed into the future or not. So, yeah, to me, the initial review after 2 years is the critical one at this point, at this juncture of where we're at in the project overall.
Thank you. I'm just going to go to Ms. Williams, who wish to add something in here.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I can appreciate that there's a desire to review this as frequently as needed. What I'd like to share is that because it's a council policy, the standard practice is on a council policy, it's reviewed by council. So what I could suggest is that to the amendment that you have currently underway, if you added the language or more frequently, if staff identify a need for an earlier review, that might resolve the problem for you.
That's an amendment to the amendment. Thank you for the suggestion. If anybody at this table wishes to make it, then we will put it up on the screen. I think just be careful. You had the floor. Okay. Okay, so it's moved, but just a second, I'm just going to get the actual wording up here.
That I can live with, yeah.
More frequently if staff identify need for an earlier review. So that's the amendment to the amendment.
Yeah.
Anybody wish to discuss that amendment? Okay, I'm going to call the question then on that amendment to the amendment. We should add the words "or more frequently if staff identify a need for an earlier review" to the amendment. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That now forms the amendment. So now the amendment reads, "Shall be reviewed every 5 years or more frequently if staff identify a need for an earlier review." Okay. That is now the motion on the floor. I appreciate that because I was having a hard time supporting it without that. I think the earlier wording was sufficient for my mind. So we're here at this table. Any other discussion on the amendment? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That is now amended. Any other motions to amend the motion that's on the floor, which is to approve the policy with those changes? I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to call the question on the main motion as amended. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. We have a policy. Let's get some playgrounds. We can't expect you to put fast playgrounds in if we take 4 hours to decide on the policy, but that's okay. We have item number 7.3, which is requirements under the Accessible British Columbia Act. We have Mr. Coates, our Director of Corporate Services, here to introduce. This is available for public input if anybody is online, because we have nobody left in the chambers who wishes to address us. This is appropriate time to put up your hand, and I'll call on you at the appropriate moment. Go ahead, Mr. Coates.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. And so while I may be the face of this before you tonight, I do have support online in the form of one Joanna Winter, who is our consultant, who was brought in to provide some assistance in bringing this one across the finish line. So you might recall that a report we brought to you in the spring noted that the Accessible BC Act, applicable to some 750 organizations in the province, was enacted last year, and that had basically three key requirements for those participating organizations, of which, of course, municipalities in BC are all included in there. One was to establish a committee, then two is to develop a plan, and also develop a feedback mechanism to receive public input on an ongoing basis. So as I mentioned, in the spring of this year, Council gave us direction to undertake a consultation during Accessibility Week, which was at the end of May and the beginning of June. And so that was done. There was your further direction was also to report back with that information, and also to come forward with the report with some recommendations for what a committee might look like. So in the report you have tonight, those public responses are provided both in summarized form in the report and in bulk form as an attachment. Some 116 people participated in that survey. during that time, and it was open for a couple of months. And moving on from that, you'll note that the committee being proposed has two pieces to it. So the first is a staff-led working group that the CEO has already authorized, and we've attached terms of reference for that group for your information. And the second one is actually the advisory body that we've developed terms of reference for your consideration on. And the thinking with this kind of an approach was really to ensure that there was a really good and strong link between capacity and budget to the aspirations of the plan and the committee. So these are very emotionally impactful circumstances, and accessibility has such a breadth of focus and what it encompasses today than what it used to mean in a more sort of limited form. So you know, it inroads into diversity and inclusion, and in a number of fronts, accessibility has a much broader breadth of meaning today than it did, I think, historically. So trying to harness a group like that with such an extent of plan to create it can be very frustrating when items aren't actionable. And so the thinking around this was, again, just to make sure that we had capacity to move along in a sort of a thoughtful and productive manner with the anticipated large number of items that are going to be included in this plan. So we've talked a little bit about sort of the initial pieces of this, and so it's the committee, it's the plan, and it's the feedback mechanism. So the plan is really the first step in the process after the committee gets going, and that's not a small undertaking. And so you'll note in the terms of reference that it's got a built-in review once that plan, we're suggesting anyway, I should say, a built-in review of the terms of reference once the plan is actually completed, because we want to make sure moving forward that there's a model of an ongoing group that suits the needs going forward. And so this will have a very strong focus on developing the plan and the feedback mechanism, and the going forward components are yet to be determined. And because of the way the legislation is structured, we felt it was beneficial, and that council might consider it beneficial to sort of take incremental steps forward with this. And that's why the review of the terms of reference is built in, to make sure that, again, going forward, we have a model and a representative committee in terms of numbers that helps to sort of manage that plan and manage other issues that will undoubtedly crop up. The plan is only part of it, and the legislation is structured in such a way that this is an ongoing long-term obligation of each local government in the province and each of these 750 organizations. So we're in the infancy of this at the starting point to meet our legislative requirements, and what this looks like 5 years from now I will be fundamentally different than where we start, I would venture to guess. So we've also noted in the report that we have received funding to help prepare that plan. So our budget overall that council approved with this one, as it was a council priority project, was $25,000. So the report notes we've received $15,000 in funding to help with that. So that reduces the initial impacts on the district's finances, to engage a consultant to help develop the plan. And we've also identified a further funding source for plan implementation. That's an open-ended intake, and so looking, if you have a mind to give us pre-authorization to apply for funding once the plan has been approved, and we'd actually come back at that time with exactly what projects would be suitable to undertake. So it's not so much a blank check, but just to sort of help us in the planning process get ready to think about that as the plan is coming forward. And you'll certainly have lots of opportunities to see what that looks like, and ultimately, of course, make the final decision on what the plan looks like and what projects would go in what sort of priority order and what sort of funding opportunities might be around at that time as well. But trying to get a sort of a bit of a leg up at the start on that sort of going forward look once the plan is prepared. So that's essentially the nub of what's before you. There's a lot of information here. This is a huge undertaking. There was no question about that. And so we've been very mindful about trying to sort of systematically move this forward instead of other approaches that have been undertaken in other municipalities that haven't perhaps met with the degree of success that was desired, and creating a bit of angst along the way. And so one of the biggest difficulties with any sort of advisory body is making sure that there's a clear understanding of what's implementable and what we can move forward with our existing capacity. So that's that. Happy to answer any questions. And as you note, the recommendations in the report are to approve the terms of reference, direct staff to commence the recruitment of the committee, and authorize a future funding application.
Great, thank you. I'm just, I made a call at the beginning of this to see if anybody from the public wished to address us. I don't see anybody online who's indicated they wish to speak. I'll leave that option available for another couple of minutes, but I think I'm going to, just in the interest of moving us along, I might just at least start with a motion to receive the report, and then we can have comments and questions simultaneously on this. And so moved and seconded, thank you. So that is live, and had Councillor Smart's hand up, I believe.
Yeah, I just start us off. I just had a few questions around the membership composition, and so that's on page 249 of 306. So with just looking at the membership, and I'm sure staff has given a lot of thought to this, so just questions about it. But my first look at it, I guess, it appears that we might possibly have a committee that does not include a person with disability. I do see that it is given preference to, but I wondered if staff considered separating out B so that it was at least one member must be a person with a disability, and then one individual who supports or represents an organization. I wonder if that was considered.
Through your worship, so I believe that is part of the makeup of the group, because there's a legislative component of that. So my recollection, I've got the terms of reference in front of me. At least one member must be an Indigenous person. At least two members must be persons with disabilities or individuals who support or represent an organization who supports persons with disabilities. And so my recollection is that we've taken that right out of our legislative requirements to do that. So and we're keeping sort of the core membership to what the legislative requirements are, because what we didn't want to do is try to imprint what it might look like. And we've included other sort of that more broad and general language that council put their mind to a couple of meetings ago around sort of the whole notion of accessibility and diversity of membership. So we've got some broad language in there. And so we're also sort of creating for your consideration, some flexibility in terms of the number of members. We are certainly experiencing some difficulty with committee recruitment. We're not certain that that's going to be an issue here, but you'll see in the draft terms of reference the suggestion of membership between 5 and 9 members, so that we're able to function with a smaller number, but certainly happy to accommodate the larger and more representative number of participants.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. So that piece that I was referencing is the terms of reference that are from the legislation. And if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is that it's a starting point, but there's a preference for keeping it exactly as written?
Through you, Mayor, so we have an obligation to those 3 key participant demographics, if that's appropriate. So we can't stray from that. We have an obligation to that. If we can't meet those, there's organizations that we can approach that will help us meet those. And then after that, it's much more broad in terms of what the makeup of the rest of the participants would look like. Or perhaps I'm not understanding the question well enough.
Councillor West.
Sorry, through you, Mayor. I guess what I'm wondering is if council felt that we wanted to do one step more than what is legislatively required, and we felt like it was important to have a member with a disability on our committee, would that be within our control, or is staff advising to not stray from that?
Just because my reading of that is that it is required to have 2 members of people with disabilities. So you want
I think I
one
can,
more?
Your Worship.
I guess what I was, sorry, through you, Mayor, what I was thinking it would be one step above what they were asking, to separate it out and ensure that we had somebody on that committee that had a disability. Because the way it's written, you could actually have 2 people that work with people with disabilities, but a committee at the end that would actually have no people with disabilities on it, was my reading of it.
Fair.
Your Worship, and thank you for the clarification. So, so yes, that's entirely within council's purview. What's being proposed is an excerpt from the legislation that we must have at least 2 members that either have a disability or have this other, they represent an organization or individual with them. Council can supplement that, absolutely.
All right, anything else?
Through you, Mayor, to staff, I guess my other comment was just in regards to, in reading your report about having a community member with potentially expertise in the field of accessible design. I guess, again, it would just be expanding upon, but again, I trust staff in the advice on how much to stray from that. But I guess in addition to the legislative wording, I thought it was of benefit to potentially have a community member that might have experience in the field of accessible design on the committee as well.
Mr. Coates?
Your Worship, so I think the short answer to that question is yes, and it's entirely within council's purview to alter that. And there are some other limitations that the terms of reference don't necessarily pick up, but we have to have at least half of the members in total that are either persons with disabilities or persons associated with those. So we still have to sort of put this together, meeting our legislative requirements. But I think the suggestion here is that the anticipated outreach is quite broad, and that will give council the flexibility to make appointments that suit that need. As long as those key core legislative requirements are met, they can easily be supplemented, yes.
Through you, Mayor, to staff, just one more question. I just wondered if staff had experience with a 5-member committee and, potentially when people are not able to attend, it still being a functioning committee at that size due to absences.
Mr. Coates?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Smart. So it's one of these things that it was less about that, and I think that quorum is quorum, and so if you have 5 members, a quorum is 3. That's less than optimal, and certainly a more desirable number for a group with a scope this broad. It would be that. But the other thing that that factors in here, and I mentioned it briefly earlier, is that we're not having a great deal of success with committee recruitment as a whole. We have an obligation to this group more than any other body that council has established, and so we're trying to find some balance. And again, the focus of this group initially is on creating the plan, and the notion of revisiting these terms of reference to look at plan implementation and whatever other roles there might be that council wishes to bestow upon an advisory body that the municipality is going to have for the long term, because I think predominantly because it's the right thing to do, but secondarily it's a legislative requirement as well.
Anything else, Councillor Smart? Thanks. Councillor Green?
Back to my original question now, and through you to Mr. Coates or Ms. Williams. Oh my gosh, I lost your name there for a minute. Is the recruitment dates for this particular committee, so is there a certain time when they should apply, or could they apply now? Or so that was my question. I have someone who would like to apply, but I couldn't tell them when, so thank you.
Mr. Coates?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Green. So I think depending on the outcome of this, if council, and once council endorses terms of reference, I think the recruiting will start right away. And so, I think we would want to wait until we've started the formal process of recruiting, just because it's easier to collect that information, and it's not sort of first one in. Right, we'll have a designed recruitment period and bring back council all of the applicants.
Go ahead, Councillor. Spade.
Supplemental, sorry, through you. Mr. Coates, will there be a specific application form that reflects what this committee is about? So a person will have an application process to apply through, correct? Thank you.
Mr. Coates?
Your Worship, through you, yes. And so I think most of our recruitment is very focused on what the terms of reference for the group are, and this one more than others, I think, because of its range of participants that are desired to sort of meet that need. And again, stressing that we're not sure how big this is going to get. We've got a 116-person survey to sort of provide a bit of a sense of what folks in the community this summer were talking about, but it will undoubtedly expand in scope as time goes by. And so the notion of this this review after the plan, I think is rather important to make sure that this is meeting those exponential needs that are likely to occur over time.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I have Councillor Patterson and Braithwaite.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I guess, and I don't know exactly how you've how staff have conferred on this and put this all together. Based on what I've learned about the issue, though, within this region, there's kind of two main groups. IACD, which Mr. Coates is probably very familiar with, and they have representation also on BC Accessible Transit Advisory Committee and on the BC Ferries Accessibility Advisory Committee, in addition to their own committee that they work with. And then the second one is the Victoria Disability Resource Center, who are the group that issue the parking permits. They offer the courses on disability inclusion and awareness training for staffs or volunteers, and do the advocacy and the assistance and the provincial programs. So I would think that we would want to at least confer and perhaps even invite members of these committees who have been actively up and running and have all of the contacts within the framework to invite them. And I imagine there would be reimbursement required for travel expenses, et cetera, to have them at meetings. But I would think that we would want to invite them, at least initially, to confer with and participate in some way to assist us to getting the committee started, because otherwise, as I read this, I'm thinking this could be somewhat of a cumbersome, time-consuming process to try to get started without the assistance of readily established input from these groups to cover all of the bases. So I just offer that as a suggestion to get the committee going in rapid fashion. Thank you.
Mr. Coates, what is the ability here to utilize some of these existing groups within the terms of reference that are laid out here?
Thank you, Your Worship. And so through you to that question and to Councillor Patterson's question. So in putting this report together, actually both of the reports, there has been some advice and outreach to the organizations undertaken already. And we've got definitely interested parties and standing offers of assistance to move these things forward, because like I was noting earlier, there's such a breadth to this, and we would be foolhardy to suggest that we know it all. And so I realize that my time with the district is drawing to a conclusion, and so I can't really speak for my successor, but I would fully expect, given the breadth of this, that connection will only expand as we start to move this forward, because I think the groups that staff had already reached out to, they're prepared to sort of help us with recruitment as needed, and sort of helping shape this. There's lots of advice out there for us, and we're not the only one going through it. So there's communications intermunicipally, and Councillor Patterson mentioned IACTI, that's a group that's been in operation for a number of years out on the West Shore, and a little closer in as well. And so all of that outreach has taken place and will continue to take place. That would be my advice to my successor, is to stay plugged in with the organizations that are out there to gain that sort of insight and assistance that's invaluable.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Patterson? Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. As far as the timing of the meetings goes, and I noticed that in the report you said that there would be monthly meetings, and I'm wondering if, I think probably in the beginning that's probably wise to until the committee gets up and running, but when I look at, for example, Parks, Rec and Culture, they're only meeting quarterly. Now, I'm not saying that that's enough for them to be meeting, but I'm wondering if you want to be tied into monthly meetings, or if you want to leave it a little bit more open.
Mr. Coates?
Oh, Your Worship, so the terms of reference call for bi-monthly meetings, so every 2 months at this point, and so this is, again, this is plan development, so we anticipate that being slightly more focused, and there's a bit of urgency to that. We're going to have a consultant come on board that's going to help drive that through, and so I think that consultant will be able to be more singularly focused on the group than would our small staff that might be providing support to that. So I think initially, again, just keeping in mind that what we suggest here is get the plan done, do a review about what going forward looks like, and focusing that on a meeting every couple of months.
Thank you. Don't see any other questions. We have a motion to receive on the floor. Councillor Green, did you wish to? Nope. There is a motion to receive. So I'll call that question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. I believe the other pieces can all be moved as one if that's the will of the body. Councillor Green?
I will move all other recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on this? Councillor Smart?
Yeah, I just want to echo again, and I appreciate through Mayor to staff, like that the comments around recruitment difficulties that have been having, keeping it as simple as possible. And I just want to say again that my hope is that we do have a committee that has representation from a disabled individual on that committee. If we're not sort of explicitly stating it, I guess I just want to say that again, that I think it would be a lost opportunity to have that committee without that voice. And I see that the current structure allows for that to happen. But I am fine moving the recommendations as written.
Councillor Green?
Just really quickly, excuse me, through you, I really appreciate all of the work that's gone into this, and thank you, Ms. Winter, as well. And I just wanted to say, one of the things that we might be experiencing in a difficulty to recruit volunteers is frequency of meetings. I think the less frequency, or the the less meetings that occur for these committees, it's very hard to keep volunteers engaged. So that's just a little bit of advice, that maybe we need to review the frequency of meetings and meeting schedules for our volunteer bodies, because I think partly it's because they don't feel fully engaged, because meetings just don't occur that often. So that's just that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, just a comment here. We haven't discussed it, but I did want to thank staff for the work they did reaching out to other municipalities and jurisdictions to see if there were synergies or opportunities to draw on others' experience in some way to forward what we need to do. And that has been sort of identified as something that we wouldn't lose track of going forward. I think that's great. But I do think it does make sense, given all the complexity of this, and that we're starting up with a big project, that just going forward with this plan without that is probably actually not a bad thing right now, because that would have added, I'm sure, another layer of complexity. So, but very also happy to see that our police force, the police department, will be part of the exercise. That makes perfect sense to me. So just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't see a lot of other hands popping up on this one. A very brief comment. I take Councillor Smart's comments there. I think we need to make an extra effort to reach out and make sure that we're very vocal about the fact that we are, and because disability people with a lived experience of disability is so varied, right? It could be visual disability, audio, physical, you name it. And so the more people we have with lived experience, the stronger that is. And
That's
so we
so
want to make
true.
sure that we spread that word through as much media as possible and spread it through amongst friends and neighbors as well. So, because at the end of the day, we will have applications, this council will have to decide who to appoint, and those are all factors that we'll have to consider in that balance. Mr. Coates, you wish to add something to?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think it's really just a footnote to perhaps clarify that I think optimally that the lived experience is what's desired, and you know, trying to be mindful that there's also huge experience and benefit to people who assist those folks as well, and it's keeping the options open. But I think that, you know, if a person were to think this through, that having a group like this that doesn't have people who are directly affected by this, I would be surprised if we weren't in a position to have a significant piece of that, but also benefiting from the other pieces, the caregiving side or the organizations and all these things. So we're trying to build in flexibility, but I think the overarching intent of this is lived experience would be, you know, as desirable as possible in the sense of the composition of the group.
Thank you.
And as well, I just wanted to throw a footnote in on the numbers. And Ms. Williams was whispering in my ear as I was getting carried away with one of my answers. But, you know, the notion is we're seeking to achieve 9 participants, not 5. And it wouldn't, you know, we would consider ourselves unsuccessful if we don't end up with 9. I think we will. I think there could be tough decisions on how to pare the group down, and that's certainly the more fervent hope around this. But to create that flexibility in the event that sometimes committee members join and drop off, and it's trying to keep some continuity in that, again, especially for the initial phase of what this group is trying to get that plan built.
I just want to also add to my comments, my appreciation at the very tail end of this report. Behind all of the survey responses was the staff working group portion of this, which has senior leadership from all departments working together on a monthly basis to operationalize the recommendations in the plan that come out of this. And this wouldn't be successful without that. So I just want to express my appreciation that while not forming part of this terms of reference, it's there for reference to, and I think really an important part to the success. So I just want to highlight that as well, because it's easy to miss it if you're not reading through all the comments. I don't see any other hands up on this, so I'm ready to call the question. The recommendation is all the recommendations in this report. So call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That moves it forward. So look forward to that accessibility committee. 8.1 has been removed from the agenda. Is that correct? And so we are down to
Adjournment.
moved. Is there a seconder? I don't see a seconder. Is there no seconder for adjournment? Just kidding. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? Thank you.